The sprawling estates of hidden hills were designed to keep secrets. Behind the high iron gates and the manicured hedges that stood like soldiers in a row, silence was the most expensive commodity. It was a place where appearances were polished to a blinding shine, and reality was often swept under rugs made of imported silk. In this world, Maria stood out, not because she wanted to, but because she was the invisible engine that kept the illusion running. Maria was 42 years old, though the lines around her eyes suggested a life lived with the weight of 2 generations on her shoulders. Her hands were rough, the skin thickened by years of scrubbing marble floors and polishing silver that did not belong to her. She moved through the corridors of the Donovan estate like a ghost. She had learned long ago that the best way to survive in Daniel Donovan's house was to make no sound, to take up no space, and to never, under any circumstances, look him directly in the eye when he was in a mood. And Daniel was always in a mood. He was a man who viewed the world as a hierarchy, a ladder where he sat comfortably at the top, and everyone else was merely a rung to be stepped on. He was the CEO of a ruthless venture capital firm, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, stopping just at the corners of his mouth like a warning. Sign he didn't just employ people. He owned their time, their energy, and in Maria's case, her dignity. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that felt heavy with humidity and unspoken tension. Maria was in the solarium, wiping down the glass walls that looked out over the pool. Her back ached. It was a dull throbbing pain that had become her constant companion over the last 3 years. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Her daughter, Sophia, was starting college in the fall, and every dollar Maria earned was already spent in her mind before it even hit her bank account. A small scratching sound on the tile floor made Maria pause. She glanced down, and her tired face softened instantly. It was Luna. The small scruffy terrier mix was barely 6 months old, a rescue dog Maria had found shivering near the service entrance during a storm. Daniel had technically allowed her to keep the dog, but only because it amused him to see Maria grateful for scraps, and strictly on the condition that the rat, as he called it, never entered the main living area. Luna wagged her tail, her dark eyes looking up at Maria with pure, uncomplicated adoration. For a moment, the vast, cold mansion felt a little warmer. Maria reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a tiny piece of dried chicken she had saved from her own lunch. She crouched down, whispering in Spanish, telling the little dog to be quiet, to be good, to stay hidden. Luna took the treat gently, her small body wiggling with joy. It was a secret moment, a tiny rebellion of love in a house built on power. But the peace didn't last. The heavy oak doors at the end of the hallway slammed open. The sound echoed off the marble floors like a gunshot. Luna scrambled backward, her ears flattening against her. Hedmira stood up instantly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She smoothed her apron, fixed her posture, and waited. Daniel was home early, and judging by the heavy, aggressive cadence of his footsteps, the day had not gone well. Daniel Donovan walked into the room bringing a storm with him. He was a handsome man in a conventional, terrifying way. His suit cost more than Maria made in 6 months. His hair was perfectly styled, not a strand out of place. Even though his face was flushed with irritation, he didn't look at Maria. To him, she was part of the furniture, functional and necessary, but unworthy of acknowledgement unless she... He threw his briefcase onto a pristine white sofa. He loosened his tie with a sharp, angry jerk. He began barking orders into his phone, his voice loud and dripping with condescension. He was berating an assistant, tearing apart some junior executive for a mistake that sounded trivial. Maria kept wiping the glass, trying to make her movements rhythmic and silent. She made herself small. She prayed he would just walk through to his study, but he didn't. He ended the call and stood there staring out at the pool. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. Then he turned slowly. His eyes landed on Maria. It wasn't a look of recognition. It was a look of assessment. Like he was looking for a place to put his anger. He asked her if the patio had been swept. His voice was calm, but it had an edge, like a razor blade hidden in cotton. Maria nodded quickly. She said, "Yes, Mr. Daniel. I did it this morning." Daniel walked over to the glass door. He peered out, squinting at the pristine stone deck. He pointed to a single dried leaf that had blown over the wall in the last hour. He asked her if she called that clean. He asked her if she was blind or just lazy. Maria felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She apologized. She said the wind must have brought it in. She moved to go open the door and retrieve it, but Daniel held up a hand. He told her to stop making excuses. He told her that people like her always had an excuse, that it was always the wind, or the traffic, or the language barrier. He chuckled then, a dry, humorless sound. He told her to leave it, Kai said. He had guests coming tonight, important people, and he didn't want her cluttering up the visual while he was trying to think. He turned to leave, but then he stopped. He sniffed the air. He looked down at the floor near the potted palm where Luna was hiding behind the ceramic base. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He asked what that smell was. Maria froze. She said she didn't smell anything. Daniel stepped closer. He kicked the pot lightly with his polished shoe. Luna, terrified by the noise, let out a tiny, involuntary whimper. Daniel froze. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He bent down and looked behind the pot. Luna was shaking, pressed as flat as she could get against the wall. Daniel stood up and looked at Maria. He asked her why the rat was in the main house. He reminded her of the rules. He spoke to her like she was a child, explaining that rules were what separated civilization from chaos. Maria pleaded softly. She explained that the gardeners were using leaf blowers outside and the noise terrified the puppy. She promised to take her to the service quarters immediately. Daniel didn't answer. He just watched her, enjoying her fear. Finally, he waved his hand dismissively. He told her to get the animal out of his sight. He told her that tonight was the cocktail party for the investors and everything had to be perfect. He warned her that if he saw one hair, one paw print, or heard one bark, she would be out on the street before the last guest left. Maria scooped up Luna and hurried out of the room, clutching the puppy to her chest. Her hands were trembling. She knew he meant it. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and blood orange. The house transformed. The harsh daylight softened into ambient mood. Lighting, the staff, a catering team hired for the night, moved with military precision. Trays of caviar, crystal glasses of champagne, and 8 hors d'oeuvres that looked like art pieces were positioned on floating tables. Maria changed into a formal uniform. It was a stiff black dress with a white collar, starched and uncomfortable. She was not supposed to serve food tonight. The catering staff handled that. Her job was maintenance. She was to circulate invisibly, removing empty glasses, straightening cushions the moment a guest stood up, and ensuring the illusion of perfection never wavered. She left Luna in her small room off the garage. She made a comfortable bed of blankets and turned on a small radio to drown out the noise of the party. She kissed the puppy's head, whispering that she would be back soon. Luna looked at her with wide, trusting eyes. Maria felt a pang of guilt, leaving her alone, but she had no choice. The mortgage on her mother's house, her daughter's tuition, the food on their table, it all depended on her ability to survive tonight. By 8 p.m., the living room was full. The air smelled of expensive perfume and aged scotch. The guests were a collection of Seattle's Ely Tech moguls, real estate developers, and the kind of women who looked like they had been airbrushed into existence. They laughed loudly, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of self-importance. Daniel was in his element. He held court in the center of the room, a glass of whiskey in one hand. He was charming, charismatic, telling stories that painted him as a genius of industry. He laughed at the right moments, touched people on the shoulder to make them feel special, and guided the conversation exactly where he wanted it to go. Maria moved through the crowd like a shadow. She collected napkins. She wiped away condensation rings from the piano. She kept her head down, but she could feel the tension radiating from Daniel. Every time he looked around the room, his eyes scanned for imperfections. He was performing, and the stress of the performance made him dangerous. Around 9 p.m., the atmosphere shifted. The alcohol had loosened tongues. The jokes became louder, cruder. Daniel was standing with 3 of his biggest investors. They were discussing a merger, talking numbers that could buy entire neighborhoods. Maria approached the group cautiously. There was an empty glass on the side table next to Daniel's elbow. She needed to remove it. It was her job. She waited for a break in the conversation. When Daniel paused to take a sip of his drink, she stepped forward, murmuring a soft "excuse me." She reached for the glass. At that exact moment, Daniel gestured expansively with his arm to emphasize a point. His hand collided hard with Maria's wrist. The crash was deafening. The heavy crystal tumbler didn't just fall, it flew. It hit the edge of the marble fireplace hearth and shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. The amber liquid splashed across the pristine white rug, staining it instantly. A few drops landed on the polished leather shoes of the lead investor. The room went silent. The laughter died in throats. The music seemed to stop, though the string quartet in the corner kept playing nervously. Every eye in the room turned to the center. Maria stood frozen. Her hand was still outstretched. Her heart stopped beating for a terrifying second. She looked at the stain on the rug, then at the investor's shoe, and finally, terrified, at Daniel. Daniel didn't yell. Not at first. He looked at the mess, then he looked at Maria. His face went blank, devoid of all the charm he had been projecting seconds ago. He let out a long, exaggerated sigh, shaking his head as if he were a disappointed parent dealing with a toddler. He apologized to his guests. He told them he was so sorry they had to witness this. He called it incompetence in its natural habitat. The investors chuckled nervously, unsure if they should laugh or look away. Daniel decided for them. He smiled a tight, cruel smile and said, "It's hard to get good help these days. You try to give people opportunities, you try to lift them up, and this is how they repay you, by destroying a $40,000 rug." Maria fell to her knees. She didn't think about it. It was instinct. She pulled a cloth from her apron and began frantically dabbing at the rug, whispering apologies. "I am so sorry, Mr. Daniel. It was an accident. I will clean it. I will fix it. Fix it." Daniel's voice rose, sharp and mocking. He stepped closer, towering over her. "You can't fix that, Maria. That is silk. It's ruined, just like the mood of this party." He pulled out his phone. The movement was casual, but the intent was malicious. He opened the camera app and started recording. He pointed the lens down at her as she scrubbed uselessly at the stain. "Look at this," Daniel said, narrating for his digital audience, but speaking loud enough for the room to hear. "This is what happens when you don't pay attention. This is why details matter. Say hello, Maria." He shoved the phone closer to her face. Maria flinched, turning her head away, shielding her eyes. "Please, sir," she whispered. "Please don't." "Oh, now she's shy," Daniel laughed, looking around at his guests, inviting them to join in. "She destroys my property, ruins my evening, and now she wants privacy. Can you believe the entitlement?" A few people laughed. Most just watched, morbidly fascinated. No one stepped forward. No one told him to stop. In this circle, money was the only moral compass, and Daniel had the most money. Maria felt tears burning her eyes. She felt stripped naked, her dignity shredded in front of 50 strangers. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to melt into the floor. She kept scrubbing, even though she knew it was pointless. She just needed something to do with her hands so they wouldn't see her shaking. And then a sound cut through the tension, a sharp, high-pitched bark. Luna, the service door in the hallway, had not latched all the way. The noise of the crash, the silence that followed, and the sound of Maria's distress had drawn the puppy out. She came trotting into the living room, her claws clicking softly on the hardwood. She looked small, scruffy, and completely out of place among the tuxedos and gowns. She saw Maria on her knees. To a dog, that posture didn't mean submission. It meant play or it meant affection. Luna's tail wagged. She let out a happy little yip and trotted toward her human, oblivious to the predator standing above her. Daniel lowered his phone. His eyes tracked the dog. The vein in his temple began to pulse. This was the final insult. First, the rug. Now, the rat in the middle of his party. His authority was being challenged by a housekeeper in a "I told you," Daniel said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I told you to get rid of it." Maria looked up, gasping. She scrambled to grab Luna, reaching out her arms. "No, Luna, go back, go back." Luna thought it was a game. She hopped just out of Maria's reach, her tail a blur. She sniffed at Daniel's shoe, the one that had just been splashed with expensive scotch. Daniel didn't hesitate. He didn't think He simply reacted with the casual cruelty of a man who believes he is untouchable. He drew his leg back. "Get away from me, you filth." He stomped. He didn't just nudge the dog away. He brought the heel of his heavy Italian leather shoe down hard on the puppy's hind leg. The sound was sickening. A crack, followed instantly by a high, piercing shriek of pain that sounded almost human. Luna collapsed, spinning in a circle, yelping frantically. Unable to put weight on her back leg, she wet the floor in terror and agony. The room gasped. This wasn't a joke anymore. This wasn't a social faux pas. This was violence. The guests A woman near the front covered her mouth with her hand. Even the investors looked pale. Maria screamed. It was a sound torn from the bottom of her soul. "Luna," she lunged forward, gathering the crying puppy into her arms. Luna buried her face in Maria's neck, shivering violently, her whines turning into low, pathetic whimpers. Maria looked up at Daniel. For the first time in 3 years, she looked him in the eye. Her face was wet with tears, but her expression was one of pure horror and hatred. "You hurt her," she sobbed. "She is a baby. You hurt her." Daniel adjusted his. Kuflink, he looked annoyed, not remorseful. He looked at the guests, shrugging. "It tried to bite me. You all saw it. It was self-defense." He looked back at Maria, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. "Get out. Get that thing out of my house. You're done. You're fired. And don't think you're getting paid for this week. That rug costs more than your life." Maria struggled to her feet, clutching the injured dog. Blood was staining her white apron. She felt dizzy. She had no car. She took the bus. The vet was miles away. She had no money. Panic began to close in on her throat like a vice. 200 yards away, in the modest bungalow that sat in the shadow of the Donovan Estate's privacy wall, Jake was in his kitchen. Jake was 32, built like a wall of granite, with the calm, alert eyes of a man who had seen the worst days of people's lives and helped them survive it. He was a firefighter with the city SCB station, and more importantly, he was a handler for the Urban Search and Rescue Task Force. At his feet sat Max, a 90-pound German Shepherd with a coat like black ink and tan velvet. Max was not a pet. He was a partner. He was trained to find heartbeats under rubble, to track lost children in the woods, and to sense distress long before a human could hear it. Jake was packing his gear bag for the night shift. He placed his helmet on the counter. The window was open, letting in the cool evening breeze. Usually, the hedge blocked out the noise from the mansion next door. But tonight, the sounds were different. First, there had been the music, the low hum of a party. Jake was used to that. Daniel Donovan liked to show off. Jake had met Daniel once when Jake first moved in. Daniel had complained about Jake's truck being an eyesore parked in the driveway. That was all Jake needed to know about the man. But then the rhythm of the night changed. Jake paused, his hand hovering over his radio. He heard the shatter of glass. He heard the sudden silence that follows a disaster. And then he heard the voice. He couldn't make out the words, but he knew the tone. It was the tone of a bully. It was the tone of a man using his voice like a whip. Max stood up. His ears swiveled forward, like radar dishes. A low growl rumbled deep in the dog's chest. Max paced to the back door, whining urgently. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked, stepping to the window. Then it happened. The yelp. It wasn't just a bark. It was a scream of pain. It cut through the suburban quiet like a siren. It was followed by a woman's cry, desperate and terrified. Jake didn't think. The instincts honed by 10 years of running into burning buildings took over. He grabbed his medical kit. He didn't grab a weapon. He didn't need one. He clipped his badge onto his belt not to show off, but to identify himself as authority. "Max, let's go," he commanded. They moved out the back door, moving fast. Jake vaulted the low part of the stone wall that separated the properties. Max cleared it in a single fluid leap. They sprinted across the perfectly manicured lawn of the Donovan estate. The French doors to the living room were open. Jake could see the scene inside like a tableau on a stage. The guests standing in awkward circles. The man in the suit looking smug. The woman on the floor weeping, clutching a small, broken animal. Jake slowed his pace as he hit the patio. transitioning from a run to a tactical walk. He needed to control the room, not add to the chaos. He signaled Max to heal. The dog glued himself to Jake's left leg, his eyes locked on Daniel. Jake stepped through the doors. His boots echoed on the hardwood, a heavy, authoritative sound that made heads turn. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't knock. He walked straight into the center of the room, his eyes scanning for threats, his presence sucking the oxygen out of Daniel's performance. "Fire department," Jake announced, his voice booming, clear and steady. I heard a distressed call. "Who was injured?" Daniel spun around. He looked shocked, then offended. "Who the hell are you? You can't just walk in here. This is private property." Jake ignored him. He looked straight at Maria. He saw the blood on her apron. He saw the unnatural angle of the puppy's leg. He saw the terror in the woman's eyes. He dropped to one knee beside her, ignoring the billionaire looming over them. "Ma'am," Jake said, his voice instantly softening to a gentle rumble. "I'm a first responder. I'm here to help. Let me see the dog." The living room of the Donovan estate had become a stage for two very different kinds of power. On one side stood Daniel, vibrating with the manic energy of a man whose authority had never been questioned. On the other knelt Jake, a stillness in the center of the storm, his large hands moving with deliberate tenderness over the broken body of the puppy. Max, the German shepherd, sat like a statue. Between them, he didn't growl again, but his gaze was fixed on Daniel. Every time the millionaire took a step forward, Max's ears swiveled and his muscles coiled beneath his sleek black coat. It was a silent warning. "I am watching you." Jake ignored Daniel completely. He focused entirely on Maria and Luna. "I need you to keep her head steady," Jake instructed Maria softly. His voice was a low rumble, designed to lower the heart rates of everyone. Within earshot, "She's in shock. Talk to her. Let her know you're here." Maria, trembling, cupped Luna's small face. Her tears dripped onto the dog's fur. "It's okay, mi amor," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The nice man is helping." Jake opened his medical kit. He moved with the muscle memory of a man who had treated victims in collapsed buildings and car wrecks. He pulled out a small pen light and checked Luna's gums. They were pale to pale. "What is this performance?" Daniel's voice cut through the air, loud and incredulous. He looked around at his guests, gesturing with his whiskey glass. "Look at this. A fireman breaking into my home to play vet." "Is this where my tax dollars go?" He took an aggressive step toward Jake. "I asked you a question. Who gave you permission to enter this house?" Jake didn't look up. He was palpating Luna's hind leg, feeling the unnatural grind of bone against bone. Luna whimpered a high, thin sound that made Maria flinch. "Sir," Jake said, his voice calm but hard as steel. "Step back. You are agitating the patient." "The patient?" Daniel laughed, a sharp, incredulous bark. "It's a dog, a rat. Bichi me. If you want to be useful, take it outside and put it down." At the words "put it down," Jake stopped. He froze for a fraction of a second. Then he slowly stood up. He, Hosey too. His full height towering over Daniel by 2 inches, he turned to face the CEO. Jake's face was unreadable, but his eyes were cold. "This dog didn't bite you," Jake said. He pointed to the pristine cuff of Daniel's trousers. "There's no tear. There's no blood. But there is a fracture in this animal's femur that suggests high-velocity impact, or a stomp." The accusation hung in the air. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "Are you accusing me?" Daniel stepped into Jake's personal space. "Do you have any idea who I am? I could buy your entire fire station and turn it into a garage for my cars." "Get out now!" Max let out a low, vibrating growl. It was deep, resonating in the chest, a primal sound that triggered an instinctive fear in everyone in the room. Daniel stumbled back, his courage faltering for a split second. "Control your animal?" he shrieked. "That thing is dangerous." "He's not dangerous," Jake said, his hand resting calmly on Max's head. "He's trained to identify threats. Right now, he's identifying you." Jake turned back to the room, addressing the crowd of wealthy onlookers. He saw the doubt in their faces, but he also saw the discomfort. They were witnessing something ugly, and the shiny veneer of the party was cracking. "Does anyone here have a clean towel?" Jake asked. "I need to stabilize this leg before we move her." A young woman in a silver dress, standing near the piano, hesitated. She looked at Daniel, then at the suffering puppy. She made a choice. She grabbed a pristine white linen napkin from a tray and hurried over, handing it to Jake. "Thank you," Jake said, nodding to her. "Don't you dare!" Daniel shouted at the woman. "That is imported linen." The woman looked at Daniel, her expression hardening. "It's a dog, Daniel. You heard it. I did what was necessary." Daniel roared, losing control. "It's my house, my rules. And if the help can't keep their filth out of my sight, they pay the price." He turned his rage back on Maria. She was still kneeling, cradling Luna, looking small and defenseless. Daniel pointed a finger at her. "You're finished, Maria. You hear me? You walk out that door, and I will make sure you never work in this zip code again. I will call immigration. I will call the police and tell them you stole from me. I will bury you." Maria flinched, as if he had struck her. She knew he could do it. She knew men like him held the keys to the world, and people like her were just standing in the doorway. She began to sob, a sound of pure hopelessness. Jake didn't hesitate. He stepped between Daniel and Maria. He became a physical wall. "That's enough," Jake said. "You are threatening a witness, and you are interfering with a first responder during a medical emergency. Witness." Daniel sneered. "Witness to what?" "Me disciplining a pest." "Witnessed to animal cruelty," Jake stated clearly, "which is a felony in this state, and witnessed to workplace harassment." Daniel laughed, but it sounded strained. "You think you can pin that on me? I have lawyers who cost more per hour than you make in a year. I'll ruin you. I'll have your badge by morning." Jake pulled his radio from his belt. He pressed a button, the squelch of static echoing loudly in the silent mansion. "Dispatch, this is Rescue 4. I am on scene at 405 Crestview Drive. I have a 10 to 54 animal in distress. Confirming blunt force trauma. Requesting animal control on a patrol unit for a domestic disturbance." "Copy that. Rescue 4. The dispatcher's voice came back.com, and professional units are en route, ETA 10 minutes. Daniel's face went pale. He hadn't expected Jake to actually call it in. He thought intimidation would work. He thought money was a shield that blocked out consequences. "You called the police?" Daniel hissed. "On me? In my own house?" "I called for assistance," Jake corrected. He turned back to Maria. "Ma'am, we need to get Luna to a vet immediately. I can stabilize her here, but she needs X-rays and pain management." Maria looked up, her eyes wide with fear. I have no car. I have no money for a vet like this." "Don't worry about the money," Jake said gently. "My truck is outside." "I'm taking you. She's not going anywhere." Daniel shouted. He moved to block the French doors. "She is on the clock. She leaves now. She's abandoning her post. That's cause for termination." Jake finished wrapping Luna's leg in linen, napkin, using a small roll of gauze from his kit to secure it. He lifted the puppy gently. Luna whimpered but leaned into his chest, sensing safety. "She's terminated," Jake asked, looking at Daniel. "Good. Then you have no authority over her movements." Jake looked down at Maria. He extended a hand. "Come on, Maria. Get up. You don't have to stay here." Maria looked at his hand. It was large, scarred, and steady. She looked at Daniel, who was fuming, his face twisted in a mask of ugly entitlement. She looked at the guests, who were watching her like she was a character in a play. She thought about her daughter. She thought about the years of swallowing insults. She thought about Luna's scream. Slowly, shakily, she reached out. She took Jake's hand. He pulled her to her feet. She was unsteady, her legs weak from adrenaline, but Jake held her arm to support her. "Let's go," Jake said. They began to move toward the doors. Max walked beside Maria. placing his body between her and the room, a living shield. "You walk out that door," Daniel shouted, his voice shaking with rage, "and I will destroy you. Do you eke me? You're a nobody. I am Daniel Donovan." Jake stopped at the threshold. He turned back one last time. The room was silent. "You're a man who kicks puppies," Jake said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "That's all you are." He turned and walked out into the night. As they crossed the lawn, the cool air hit Maria's face. She felt like she was waking up from a nightmare. She could hear the sirens in the distance, getting closer. "Is she going to die?" Maria asked, looking at the bundle in Jake's arms. "No," Jake promised. "She's tough, like you." Back inside the mansion, the spell had broken. The guests began to whisper. The awkwardness had turned into judgment. "Did you see that?" Someone whispered near the bar. "He really stomped on it." "I thought he said it bit him," another replied. "That fireman said there was no bite." Daniel stood alone in the center of the room. The stain on the rug was still there. The silence of the house felt different now. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of scrutiny. He pulled out his phone again. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. He dialed his lawyer. "Fix this," he snapped the moment the line connected. "I don't care what it costs. I want that fireman fired. I want the maid discredited. Find dirt on them. Find anything. No one walks into my house and humiliates me." He hung up and looked around the room. He forced a smile, but it looked like a rictus of panic. "Please, everyone," he said, waving his hands. "Just a misunderstanding. The man is clearly deranged. Let's get back to the evening." But the energy was gone. People were checking their phones. Some were asking for their coats, and in the corner, a teenage girl, the daughter of one of the investors, pressed stop on her phone. She looked at the video she had just recorded. It captured everything. The stomp, the scream, the threat, Jake's entry. She looked at Daniel with disgust. Then she opened her social media app. She typed a caption, "This is the real Daniel Donovan. Please share." She hit post. Jake's truck was a beat-up Ford, functional and smelling of pine and dog. He opened the passenger door for Maria. Max hopped into the back seat, resting his head on Maria's shoulder through the gap. Jake placed Luna gently in Maria's lap. "Hold her tight. It'll keep her from jostling." He climbed into the driver's seat and started "Di Indang." As he pulled out of the driveway, the police cruisers swept past them, lights flashing, heading toward the mansion. "Are we in trouble?" Maria asked, watching the red and blue lights in the rearview mirror. "He is a powerful man. He knows the mayor. He knows everyone. He doesn't know me," Jake said. "And he doesn't know the law as well as he thinks he does." He glanced over at her. "Maria, I'm going to take you to the emergency." Vet on 4th. They're good people. They know Max. After that, do you have somewhere to go? "I don't think you should go back to your apartment tonight. If he has your address, he might send someone to harass you." Maria swallowed hard. "My mother lives in the city." "But it is far." "That's fine," Jake said. "We'll get the dog sorted. Then I'll drive you wherever you need to go." Maria looked down at Luna. The puppy's breathing was shallow, but steady. She looked at Jake's profile. He was calm, focused. He didn't look like a hero from a movie. He just looked like a decent man doing a decent thing. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did you come? You know who he is. You know he can hurt you." Jake tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "I heard a scream," he said simply. "When you hear a scream, you go. That's the job." And besides, double quotes, he glanced in the mirror at Max. "People who hurt DOGS, they don't stop at dogs. If he's willing to do that in front of 50 people, I don't want to think about what he does when no one is watching." Maria shivered. She knew exactly what he did when no one was watching. She thought of the insults, the thrown objects, the way he made her feel less than human. "He recorded me," Maria whispered. "Before you came. He filmed me on the floor. He said he would show everyone." "Let him," Jake said, because there's another version of that story coming out. You're not alone in this, Maria. Not anymore. The veterinary clinic was bright and quiet. The receptionist recognized Max immediately and waved them through. The vet, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Eris, took one look at Luna's leg and rushed them into an exam room. Femoral fracture, Dr. Eris said 10 minutes later, holding up an x-ray. Clean break, thankfully. But it takes significant force to snap a bone like this in a young dog. This wasn't a fall, it was a stomp, Jake said, his voice flat. A grown man, full weight. Dr. Eris's jaw tightened. I need to file a report. This is actionable abuse. Please do, Jake said. I'll attach it to my incident report. Maria sat in the chair, stroking Luna's head as the sedation kicked in and the puppy's eyes grew heavy. She felt exhausted, bone-deep weary. He will come for me, she whispered. He said he would ruin me. Jake sat on the stool opposite her. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Maria, listen to me. He's going to try. He's going to use his money and his lawyers to try and scare you into silence. He wants you to disappear. I should disappear, she said, tears welling up again. I am just a housekeeper. I have no power. You have the truth, Jake said, and you have a witness. You saw what happened? My report will state exactly what I saw. And I'm not the only one. There were 50 people in that room. Not all of them are soulless. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. I have a friend, a lawyer. She works for a legal aid foundation. She helps people who get crushed by guys like Donovan. I'm going to call her tonight. Maria looked at the card. It felt like a lifeline, but it also felt like a declaration of war. I just wanted to do my job, she whispered. I just wanted to pay for Sophia's college. I know, Jake said, but sometimes the fight finds you. And when it does, you have to decide if you're going to run or if you're going to stand. He looked at Luna, now sleeping peacefully, her leg wrapped in a bright blue cast. She stood up to him. Jake smiled faintly, in her own way. She came out to find you. She didn't care that he was rich or scary. She just loved you. Maria touched the cast. She thought of the tiny puppy running into the room, tail wagging, just happy to see her. She felt a spark of anger ignite in her, just not the hot, panicked anger of earlier, but a cold, steady burn. He hurt my dog, she said. The words were simple, but they carried a new weight. Yes, he did, Jake agreed. He is not a good man, she said. No, he isn't. Maria wiped her face. She sat up a little straighter. I will talk to your friend, the lawyer. Jake nodded. Good. At that moment, Jake's phone buzzed. It was a text from a buddy at the fire station. Dude, check Twitter, you're trending. Jake frowned. He opened the link. It was a video. Shaky, vertical footage. It showed Daniel Donovan, face twisted in rage, stomping on the puppy. The sound of the yelp was clear. Then it showed Jake walking in.com and commanding the caption read, Billionaire Daniel Donovan stomps on puppy, gets shut down by hero firefighter. Hashtag Justice for Luna. It had been up for 40 minutes. It already had 50,000 views. Jake showed the screen to Maria. I think the war just started, he said. The night deepened, wrapping the city in a cold, restless quiet. In Jake's kitchen, the silence was different from the stifling oppression of the Donovan estate. It was the silence of exhaustion, but also of safety. Maria sat at the small wooden table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that Jake had placed in front of her. She stared into the dark liquid, watching the steam rise and dissipate. In the living room, Luna was asleep in a crate Jake had set up, her casted leg propped on a soft pillow. Max lay directly in front of the crate, his chin resting on his paws, keeping a silent vigil over the new pack member. Jake was pacing softly, his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in low tones, but Maria caught fragments of the conversation. Legal aid, workplace retaliation, cruelty statutes. He sounded like a general marshalling troops, his voice steady and devoid of the panic that fluttered in Maria's chest like a trapped bird. She looked around the room. It was simple, cluttered with life. Dog toys scattered on the rug, firefighter gear drying on a rack by the door, photos of smiling people on the fridge. It was a home not a museum. It made her ache for her own small apartment, for the simple dignity of her own space, which now felt miles away, threatened by the looming shadow of Daniel Donovan. Jake ended the call and sat down opposite her. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deepening in the harsh kitchen light. "Sarah is in," Jake said. "She's the lawyer I told you about. She's going to meet us tomorrow morning. She said to turn off your phone. Don't answer unknown numbers. Don't look at social media." Maria touched her phone, which lay face down on the table like a grenade. "He will send people," she whispered. "He has men who handle things for him. I have seen them. They make problems go away." "We are not a problem to be swept away," Jake said firmly. "We are a problem that fights back." He leaned forward. Maria, you need to understand what's happening out there. That veto that one the kid took. It's everywhere. Millions of people have seen it. You're not invisible anymore." Maria flinched. Being seen had always been dangerous. Invisibility was survival. "They will see a maid who broke a rug," she said bitterly. "That is what he will tell them." "No," Jake corrected her. "They see a bully hurting a puppy, and they see a woman who tried to stop him." The internet is a wild place, Maria, but one thing it hates more than anything is people who hurt dogs. He stood up and refilled her tea. "You're staying here tonight. You and Luna. I'm not letting you go back to an empty apartment where he can send his goons to bang on your door." Maria wanted to argue, to say she shouldn't impose, but the thought of being alone terrified her. She nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Jake. You are Aggie. Neighbor?" Jake smiled, a dry, self-deprecating twist of his lips. "I'm just a guy who hates bullies. Try to sleep. Tomorrow, the real noise starts." Across the property line, the lights in the Donovan mansion were blazing. The party was over, the guests ushered out with hasty apologies and gift bags, but the house was far from asleep. Daniel Donovan paced the length of his study, a glass of scotch in his hand, his third in an hour. The room was expansive, lined with books he had never read and awards he had bought. Sitting on the leather sofa were three people who looked less like guests and more like sharks in business casual. This was his crisis management team. They were expensive, ruthless, and morally flexible. "The video is bad." Daniel, the lead PR strategist, a woman named Elena with razor-sharp cheekbones, said. She didn't sugarcoat it. That wasn't what he paid her for. "It has 4 million views across Twitter and TikTok. The hashtag Justice for Luna is trending #1 in the country. They are calling for your resignation from the board." Daniel threw his glass into the fireplace. It shattered, the sound echoing the earlier destruction of the evening. "It's a 20-second clip," he shouted. "It lacks context. The dog attacked me. It's a vicious animal." "The video shows a cowering puppy," Elena said, calmly swiping on her tablet, "and it shows you stomping on it. There's no edit in the world that makes that look like self-defense." "Then we change the narrative," Daniel snapped. He pointed a shaking finger at the screen. "Focus on the maid. Who is she? Dig into her past. I want to know if she has unpaid parking tickets. I want to know if she ever stole a candy bar in 1995. Paint her as disgruntled, incompetent, a thief, and fireman." A man in a gray suit asked. He was the legal counsel, a fixer named Sterling. "He trespassed," Danielle yelled. "He broke into my home. He threatened me. I want him destroyed. Call the fire chief. Tell him his employee is a loose cannon. Tell him he was drunk. Tell him he assaulted me. I don't care what you tell him. Just get his badge stripped." Sterling nodded, taking notes. "We can file a formal complaint for conduct unbecoming. We can also hit him with a civil suit for invasion of privacy. We tie him up in court so tight he can't breathe." "Good," Daniel said, pacing again. "And the maid? Serve her tonight. I want to cease and desist. I want a demand for damages regarding the rug. Value it at $50,000. Threaten her with theft charges for, I don't know, say she stole silverware. Just scare her. Make her realize that if she speaks, she loses everything." Elena looked up from her tablet. "The public sentiment is against you, Daniel. Attacking a low-income Latina woman in a firefighter. It's bad optics. Daniel stopped pacing. He turned to her, his face a mask of cold, terrifying arrogance. Optics are for people who need to be liked, Elena. I don't need to be liked. I just need to win. Money waits. Outrage fades. By next week, they'll be angry about something else. But in the meantime, I want those two crushed. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark house next door. No one humiliates me, he whispered. No one. The morning sun brought no warmth, only a harsh, exposing light. Jake was up at 5 a.m., feeding the dogs. Luna was groggy, but eating, her tail giving a weak thump-thump against the crate floor when she saw Maria. At 8 a.m., a car pulled into the driveway. Sarah, the lawyer, stepped out. She was a small woman with wild curly hair and a presence that felt like a thunderstorm contained in a pint glass. She carried a briefcase that looked like it had survived several wars. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She walked into the kitchen, shook Maria's hand firmly, and laid a stack of papers on the table. "Okay," Sarah said, dropping into a chair. "Here's the situation. I've already been contacted by Donovan's legal team. They move fast." Maria went pale. What do they say? "They're throwing the kitchen sink at you," Sarah said, her voice brisk, but not unkind. "They are alleging that you were negligent, that you destroyed property valued at $45,000. And this is the kicker, that you attempted to blackmail him after the fact." Blackmail? Maria gasped. "I never. I just left." "I know," Sarah said. "It's a standard intimidation tactic. They want you to settle. They want you to sign an NDA, an undisclosure agreement, that says you will never talk about what happened, never release photos, and you will publicly apologize. In exchange, they kindly offer not to sue you into oblivion." Jake slammed his hand on the counter. "He stomps on her dog and demands an apology. The guy is delusional." "He's not delusional," Sarah corrected. "He's strategic. He knows Maria can't afford a lawyer. He knows she's terrified. He's counting on her folding before noon." She turned to Maria. "But here's what he didn't count on. He didn't count on the video, and he didn't count on us." Double quotes, Sarah pulled out a second stack of papers. "This," she said, tapping the pile, "is our response. We are filing a countersuit. Wrongful termination, hostile work environment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. And thanks to the vet report, Jake sent over felony animal cruelty charges." Maria looked at the papers. They looked like a foreign language. But ... he is rich. He will drag this out forever." "He might," Sarah admitted. "But right now, he's bleeding. His investors are watching. His board is watching. He wants this to go away quietly. We are going to make it very, very loud." Suddenly, there was a pounding on Jake's front door. Max barked, a deep warning sound. Jake moved to the window. "It's a process, server," he said, seeing the man in the cheap suit holding a large envelope. "A in the news van. Already." Sarah gathered her papers. "Okay? Do not open the door. Jake, go out the back. Take Maria and the dogs. I'll handle the vulture at the front." "Where do we go?" Maria asked, panic rising again. "The fire station," Jake said. "It's my shift. And it's the safest place I know. Plus ... I have a feeling I'm going to be needed there anyway." The fire station was a fortress of red brick and chrome. When Jake's truck pulled into the back lot, the crew was already buzzing. Firefighters are a tight-knit family. They gossip worse than a sewing circle, and they protect their own with ferocity. As Jake helped Maria and Luna out of the truck, a wall of uniformed men and women was waiting. They didn't ask questions. Two of them immediately took the crate from Jake. Another guided Maria toward the lounge. "Chief wants to see you. Jake," a veteran captain named Mila said quietly, clapping a hand on Jake's shoulder. "He's got City Hall on line 1 and some lawyer on line 2. It's a mess." "I figured," Jake said. He looked at Maria. "Stay here. Miller will look out for you. Nobody gets in here without a badge." Jake walked down the hallway to the chief's office. He took a deep breath, adjusted his uniform, and knocked. "Chief, Holloway was a man carved out of oak. He sat behind his desk, looking at a tablet. The video of the incident was playing on a loop. Closed the door. Holloway grunted. Jake closed it. Chief. I just got off the phone with the mayor, Holloway said, not looking up. And before that, a Mr. Sterling from Donovan Capital. They say you were drunk. They say you broke into a private residence and assaulted a pillar of the community. Jake stewed Hachi. Baraji, rest. I was sober, Chief. I entered under exigent circumstances regarding a distress call. I identified myself. I rendered aid. Holloway finally looked up. His eyes were hard, searching. And the assault? I didn't touch him, Jake said, though I wanted to. Holloway stared at him for a long moment. Then he spun the tablet around. The video backs you up. Mostly you were aggressive. Jake, I was protective, sir. Donovan is a... Dona, Holloway said. He bought us the new rig for Station 8 last year. This is political dynamite. He kicked a puppy, Chief, Jake said flatly, and he terrorized a woman who works for minimum wage. If that's the kind of money we need, we should sell the rig. Holloway sighed, rubbing his temples. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Damn it, Jake. I knew you'd say that. The chief stood up. City Hall wants me to suspend you pending an investigation. Jake felt his stomach drop. Understood, sir, however, Holloway continued. Investigations take time to organize. Paperwork gets lost. And frankly, I'm short-staffed today. So, until I find that paperwork, you're on duty. But keep your head down. If the press asks, no comment. If Donovan shows up, you call the police. You don't engage ye. Cristalla, Jake said, relief washing over him. And Jake, Holloway called out as he reached for the door. Is the dog okay? She will be good. My wife saw the video. She says, if you get fired, you can come live in our guest house. Get out of here. While Jake navigated the politics of the station, the world outside was catching fire. The video had jumped from social media to the mainstream news. CNN was running a segment. Local news vans were parked 3 deep outside the Donovan estate. The narrative, Daniel tried to plant that. The maid was negligent, was failing. Why? Because the internet had found Maria's digital footprint, or rather, the lack of one. But they found her daughter, Sophia. Sophia, a scholarship student at a state university, had seen the video. She had posted a tearful, furious response on TikTok. She spoke about her mother's hands, cracked from bleach. She spoke about the long bus rides. She spoke about how Maria sent every spare dime to pay for books so Sophia wouldn't have to clean houses. My mother is a queen, Sophia said into the camera, her voice shaking. And that man is a monster. That video went nuclear. It humanized Maria in a way Daniel's team hadn't anticipated. It turned her from a disgruntled employee into a symbol of every hardworking, underappreciated parent in America. But Daniel wasn't done. At the station, Maria sat in the lounge, sipping coffee. The TV in the corner was tuned to a news channel. Suddenly, a press conference appeared. It was Danielle's lawyer, Sterling, standing on the steps of the courthouse. He looked polished, confident. We are filing charges today against Ms. Maria Hernandez for grand larceny. Sterling announced to the microphones, we have evidence that over the course of her employment, items of significant value, jewelry, electronics have gone missing. We believe the incident last night was a staged distraction to cover up her termination for theft. Maria dropped her coffee cup. It shattered on the linoleum. Lies! She gasped, standing up, her hands trembling violently. I never took a penny. I never took a crumb. Captain Miller muted the TV. Don't listen to him, it's a strategy. They call it muddying the waters. If they make you look like a criminal, people stop caring about the victim. But people will believe it, Maria cried. I am just a housekeeper. He is a billionaire. Who do they believe? Just then, Jake walked in. He saw Maria's distress. Sarah just called. She saw the press conference. Am I going to jail? Maria asked, her voice small. No, Jake said fiercely, but they just made a mistake. A big one. Because Jake said, by accusing you of theft, they just opened up their own records too. Discovery, Sarah says if they want to prove theft, they have to prove what they owned. And she thinks Daniel Donovan has a lot of things in that house he doesn't want anyone looking too closely at. Jake knelt beside her chair. This is the hardest part, Maria. The part where they lie. But the lie is all they have. We have the truth. And we're about to get some backup. The backup arrived at noon. It wasn't lawyers. It wasn't police. It started with a single car parking across the street from the fire station, then another, then a bus pulled up, and a dozen women got off. They were domestic workers, nannies, housekeepers, caregivers, women in uniforms, women in street clothes. They held signs, hand-painted on cardboard, on the backs of pizza boxers. We stand with Maria Justice for Luna. Nitrogen monoxide, more silence. They didn't chant. They didn't scream. They just stood there, a silent vigil of solidarity. They all knew the indignity of being invisible in a rich man's house. They knew the fear of speaking up, and seeing Maria fight back had woken something up. Jake walked Maria to the window. She looked out through the blinds. "Look," Jake whispered. Maria saw them. She saw a woman she recognized from the bus stop. She saw the nanny who worked 2 houses down from Donovan's. She saw faces like hers, tired, proud, determined. Tears streamed down Maria's face, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of recognition. "I am not alone," she whispered. "No," Jake said. "You're leading an army." But as the crowd grew, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled slowly past the fire station. It didn't stop. It just cruised by, ominous and heavy. Jake watched it, his eyes narrowing. He memorized the plate number. He knew Daniel Donovan wasn't going to let a protest stop him. The legal threats were the jab. The knockout punch was still coming, and Jake had a feeling it wouldn't be fought in a courtroom. But right here, on the street, he turned to Miller. "Captain, keep the bay doors closed until the guy's ... eyes open. The bully is done talking." Night had fallen over the city, but the fire station was wide awake. The fluorescent lights hummed with a low, electric buzz that matched the tension in the room. Outside, the crowd of supporters had grown. They had lit candles, creating a sea of flickering lights that reflected in the station's bay windows. It looked like a vigil, or perhaps a siege. In the station kitchen, Maria was washing dishes. It wasn't her job, the rookies usually did it, but she needed to work, her hands needed to be busy. If they stopped moving, the shaking would return. Jake leaned against the doorframe, watching her. He had changed out of his uniform into a t-shirt and tactical pants, ready for anything. Max lay under the table, his head resting on Maria's foot. The dog had not left her side all evening, sensing her anxiety with an accuracy that no machine could match. "You don't have to do that," Jake said gently. "The guys can handle the cleanup." "I know," Maria said, scrubbing a plate with unnecessary force. "But if I sit still, I think too much. I think about Daniel. I think about what he is planning." Jake walked over and picked up a drying towel. He started drying the plates she washed. A simple, domestic rhythm in the middle of a crisis. "He's planning to scare you," Jake said. "That's his only move. He's a bully, Maria. And bullies only know one trick: escalation." "He called me a thief," Maria whispered, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "On national television. My mother saw it. My cousins in Mexico saw it. He stole my name, and we're going to get it back," Jake promised. "Sarah is in the conference room right now going through the files his lawyers sent over. She's looking for the crack in the armor." "Is there always a crack?" "Always," Jake said. "Guys like him ... they think they're smarter than everyone else. They think the rules are just suggestions. And that arrogance, that's where they slip." The radio on the wall crackled with routine dispatch chatter, a comforting background noise of the city surviving another night. But then, the heavy steel door to the conference room swung open. Sarah walked out. She wasn't walking with her usual brisk energy. She was walking slowly, reading a document in her hand, a look of utter disbelief on her face. "Jake," she said, not looking up. "Maria, come here." They gathered around the heavy oak table in the dining area. Sarah spread out 3 documents, One was the list of stolen items Daniel's lawyers had provided to the police to justify the larceny charges. The other two were printouts from an insurance database and an auction house record. "He got sloppy," Sarah said, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "He got so arrogant, so desperate to pin a felony on you, that he didn't check his own lies." She tapped the first paper. "Item number 4 on the stolen list. A 19th century jade dragon figurine, valued at $12,000. He claims Maria stole it last week." She slapped the second paper down on top of it. "This is an insurance claim from 3 years ago. Daniel reported that same figurine destroyed in a minor earthquake we had. He collected the payout." She slapped the third paper down. "And this is a record from Christie's auction house in New York. The figurine wasn't destroyed. It was sold anonymously 2 months after the insurance claim." Jake let out a low whistle. "Insurance fraud. Federal insurance fraud," Sarah corrected. "And by claiming Maria stole it now, he just admitted on public record that he lied to the insurance company and the police. He's not just looking at a lawsuit anymore. He's looking at prison time." Maria stared at the papers. "He did this for $12,000. He has millions," Jake said, shaking his head. "It wasn't about the money. It was about the game. It was about winning twice." "We have him," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the district attorney. I'm sending this over. The moment they see this, the theft charges against you drop, and an investigation into him begins." Maria felt a weight lift off her chest, so heavy she hadn't realized she was carrying it. She let out a shaky breath, a smile touching her lips for the first time in 24 hours. "So it is over?" she asked. Sarah's face grew serious again. "Legally, the tide just turned. But Maria... A man like Daniel Donovan, when he realizes he's trapped, that's when he becomes the most dangerous." As if on cue, the lights in the fire station flickered. Outside, the chanting from the crowd suddenly changed pitch. It went from a supportive hum to a scream of warning. A rookie firefighter, shouted from the front bay. "We got a situation." Jake sprinted to the front of the station, Max at his heels. Through the glass bay doors, he saw the chaos unfolding. The black SUV, the one with the tinted windows, had returned. But it wasn't alone. 2 other cars had pulled up, blocking the station's driveway. 4 men were out on the pavement. They weren't wearing suits this time. They were wearing dark clothes, tactical gear that skirted the line of legality. They looked like private security contractors, the kind hired to protect oil pipelines in war zones. They were pushing through the crowd of women and supporters. One of the men shoved a protester, an older woman holding a sign, knocking her to the ground. "Hey!" Jake roared, hitting the button to open the bay doors. The heavy metal doors began to roll up with a mechanical groan. The crowd scattered as the 4 men marched toward the station entrance. They moved with military precision. The lead man, a towering figure with a shaved head and a scar running through his eyebrow, stopped at the threshold of the garage. Jake stepped out to meet him. Behind Jake, the entire crew of Engine 4 and Ladder 9 fell in. 10 firefighters, big men with axes and Halligan bars in their hands, not raised ass. Weapons, but held with a relaxed, terrifying readiness. "This is city property," Jake said, his voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. "You are trespassing, and you just assaulted a civilian." The scarred man didn't blink. He held up a piece of paper. "We are private recovery agents. We are here to repossess property stolen from Mr. Daniel Donovan, specifically a canine." He looked past Jake, scanning the station. "Hand over the dog. And the woman." "And we leave. You have no jurisdiction here," Jake said, stepping closer. "That's not a warrant. That's a piece of paper your boss printed out. It has 0 authority. We aren't asking," the man said. He signaled to his team. 2 of them reached into their jackets. Max let out a bark that sounded like a thunderclap. The German Shepherd lunged forward, hitting the end of his lead, his teeth bared, spit flying. He wasn't posturing. He was ready to kill. The scarred man flinched, his hand hesitating near his waistband. "I wouldn't," Jake warned, his voice low and deadly. "You pull a weapon here, and you won't make it back to your car. There are 10 of us. 4 of you. And my dog is faster than your draw. The standoff lasted for 10 agonizing seconds. The air was thick with adrenaline. The firefighters stood like a wall of turnout gear and muscle. The mercenaries weighed their options. They were paid to intimidate, not to die in a brawl with the FDNY sirens, wailed in the distance reel police sirens, closing in fast. The captain had hit the panic button the moment the doors opened. The scarred man sneered. He tucked the paper back into his pocket. This isn't over, fireman. Mr. Donovan gets what he wants. Tell Donovan, Jake said, that he's done getting anything. The mercenaries backed away, slowly, keeping their eyes on Max. They retreated to their SUVs as the first police cruisers screeched into the lot. The crowd cheered, a raw, defiant sound that rose into the night air. Jake didn't cheer. He watched the SUVs peel away. He watched the police officers get out and start taking statements from the woman who was shoved. He felt a cold knot in his stomach. That was too easy. They gave up too quickly. Why come here if they weren't going to fight? Miller asked, coming up beside him. It was a show of force that failed. No, Jake said, realizing it suddenly. It wasn't a show of force. It was a distraction. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out. It was Sarah. She was still in the conference room, but she was looking at him through the glass, holding Maria's phone. Maria was standing next to her face draining of color until she looked like a ghost. Was clutching the table to keep from falling. Jake turned and ran back inside. What is it? Jake asked, bursting into the room. Maria looked at him, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond her own safety. Sophia, she whispered, my daughter. Sarah, put the phone on speaker. Play it again, Maria. Maria's hand shook as she pressed the screen. A voicemail played. It was Sophia's voice, breathless, panicked, the wind rushing past the microphone as if she were running. Mama, pick up. There are men at the dorms. They were asking for me at the front desk. The Ross said they looked like cops, but they didn't show badges. I'm leaving through the back. I'm going to the library. I'm scared, Mama. They said Mr. Donovan wants to talk to me. Please answer. The message ended. He went for her, Jake said, his voice cold. He knew he couldn't get to you here. So he went for the leverage. She is an hour away, Maria sobbed. She is all alone. If they take her, if they hurt her to get to me, they won't, Jake said. He was already moving. He grabbed his keys from the table. He grabbed his tactical jacket. Where are you going? Sarah asked. University campus, Jake said. I'm going to get her. Jake, Captain Miller warned from the doorway. You leave this station, you're a civilian. If you get into a fight with those guys, there's no union protection, no backup. You're on your own. I know, Jake said. He whistled sharply. Max, load up. The dog scrambled into the hallway, sensing the shift in energy. He didn't need to be told twice. Jake turned to Maria. Stay here. Do not leave this room. Sarah, keep working on the fraud charges. Bury him in paper. I'll handle the rest. Bring her back, Maria pleaded, grabbing Jake's arm. Her grippa was desperate. Please, Jake, bring my baby back. Jake looked her in the eye. I promise. The drive to the university was a blur of highway lights and white-knuckled tension. Jake drove his truck like he drove the rig fast, assertive, pushing other cars out of the way with sheer presence. Max sat in the passenger seat, ears perked, staring out the windshield. He whined softly, picking up on Jake's stress. I know, buddy, Jake, muttered, We're coming. He called Sophia's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. He called the campus police. This is Firefighter Jake Miller. I have reason to believe a student is in immediate danger of abduction. Sofia Hernandez. You need to send a unit to the library now. Sir, we have no reports of disturbance. The dispatcher droned. Are you a relative? I'm the guy telling you that you're about to have a kidnapping on your watch. Jake yelled. Just send the damn car. He threw the phone onto the dashboard. He couldn't rely on campus security. They were glorified hall monitors. He was 10 minutes out. As he exited the highway, his phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. It was a photo, a grainy, low-light picture taken from a distance. It showed Sophia walking quickly down a sidewalk, clutching her backpack. Then a text followed, drop the lawsuit, delete the video, or she doesn't make it to class tomorrow. Jake's blood ran cold. They were watching her right now. They weren't just trying to scare her. They were hunting her. He texted back, touch her and you die. He floored the accelerator. The old Ford truck roared, the engine straining as he blew through a red light. The campus was quiet, a sprawling maze of brick buildings and dark pathways. It was late. Most students were in their dorms or studying. Jake skidded to a halt in front of the main library. He jumped ouchie, leaving the truck running. Max, search. He held out his phone with Sophia's picture, though the dog couldn't see it. It was the command that mattered. Find the person. Max put his nose to the ground. He caught a scent fear, sweat, the lingering trace of panic. He barked once and took off toward the side of the building, toward the shadow of the engineering quad. Jake ran after him, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Sophia, he shouted. Sophia! Ahead in the gloom, he saw movement. 3 figures. 2 large men were cornering a young woman against a brick wall. One of them had grabbed her backpack. She was kicking, screaming, but the sound was muffled by the large hand clamped over her mouth. Hey! Jake roared. The men turned. They saw a 6 firefighter charging at them, and they saw the 90-pound missile of black fur launching itself through the air. Max, take him. Max hit the nearest man in the chest. The impact knocked the mercenary flat onto the pavement. The man screamed as Max's jaws clamped onto his forearm-controlled pressure, enough to break bone if he struggled. The second man, the one holding Sophia, panicked. He threw her to the ground and reached for something in his jacket, a baton, or maybe a gun. Jake didn't slow down. He didn't stop to negotiate. He lowered his shoulder and slammed into the man with the force of a battering ram. They crashed into the bushes. Jake's momentum carried them both down, but Jake was on top. He drove his knee into the man's solar plexus, knocking the wind out of him. He grabbed the man's wrist and twisted it until he heard a snap. The weapon menus. Taser skittered across the concrete. Stay down. Jake yelled, his fist cocked. Stay down. The man wheezed, holding his hands up in surrender. Jake stood up, breathing hard. He looked over. Max was standing over the first man, growling low in his throat, daring him to move. The man was frozen, terrified. Jake turned to the girl on the ground. Sophia was huddled against the wall, shaking violently, her eyes wide with shock. Sophia? Jake asked, softening his voice. I'm Jake. Your mom sent me. She looked at him, then at the dog, then at the men on the ground. She burst into tears. They said they were taking me to see him, she sobbed. You aren't going anywhere with them, Jake said, reaching out a hand to pull her up. You're coming with me. He pulled her close, shielding her body with his own. He looked down at the men. Tell Donovan, Jake spat, that he just made the last mistake of his life. He heard sirens approaching. Real sirens this time. Campus police finally waking up. Jake looked at Sophia. Let's get you home. The reunion at the fire station was a sound Maria would never forget. It wasn't a cheer or a cry. It was the sound of a lung finally taking in air after being held underwater for too long. When Jake walked through the bay doors with Sophia safe and unharmed, the entire station seemed to exhale. Maria didn't run her legs, wouldn't let her. She collapsed to her knees. Her arms opened and Sophia fell into them. They held each other on the concrete floor, rocking back and forth, a tangle of tears and whispered prayers in Spanish. Jake stood back, watching them. He looked exhausted. His knuckles were bruised, and there was a tear in his tactical jacket, but his eyes were clear. Max sat beside him, panting happily. Sensing that the job was done, the pack was safe, Captain Miller walked over and handed Jake a bottle of water. Police are here, he said quietly. Real police. Detectives from major crimes. They have the 2 guys you took down in custody. And Jake... They're talking. The mercenaries, Jake asked, cracking the water open. Turns out, hired muscle doesn't have much loyalty when they're looking at kidnapping charges. Miller said with a grin. Smalley gave up Donovan before they even got in the squad car. They said he ordered the snatch. Said he wanted leverage to make the lawsuit go away. Sarah, the lawyer, stepped into the circle. She looked like she had just won the lottery. It's over. Jake, attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, solicitation of a felony, combined with the insurance fraud evidence. The district attorney isn't just listening anymore. He's salivating. She looked at Maria and Sophia, still holding each other. We don't need to sue him anymore, she said softly. The state is going to bury him. Jake nodded. He walked over to Maria. He knelt down, putting a hand on her shoulder. It's done, he told her. He can't touch you. Not ever again. Maria looked up. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes held a fire that hadn't been there 2 days ago. She looked at her daughter, then at the firefighter who had risked everything for a stranger. He thought we were weak, Maria whispered. He was wrong, Jake said. The dawn that broke over the Donovan estate the next morning was not the polite, manicured sunrise Daniel preferred. It was chaotic, loud, and flashing with red and blue lights. Daniel was in his kitchen, making an espresso. He was trying to maintain his routine. He told himself that the silence from his mercenaries was good news. He told himself that the problem had been handled. He told himself that he was untouchable. Then the front gate crashed open. It wasn't a buzzer or a polite request. It was an armored tactical vehicle ramming through the wrought iron. Daniel dropped his cup. It shattered on the floor, a poetic echo of the glass that had started it all. He ran to the window. His driveway was swarming. FBI jackets, state police, and in the back, animal control vans, Federal agents. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Daniel Donovan, come out with your hands up. Daniel panicked. He ran to his safe. He grabbed a stack of cash and a passport. He ran to the back door, thinking he could slip out through the garden, maybe jump the wall to the neighbor's yard. He burst out the back door and froze. Standing on the other side of the low stone wall, watching him with a calm, satisfied expression, was Jake. Jake was leaning against a tree in his own yard, sipping coffee. Max was sitting next to him. Daniel stopped. He looked at the firefighter. He looked at the wall. He couldn't jump. He looked back at the house, where agents were now breaching the front door with a battering ram. You, Daniel hissed, his face purple with rage. You did this. You ruined everything. Jake took a sip of his coffee. Mornin' neighbor, all? By you, Daniel shouted, desperate now. I'll give you $1 million. Just let me through. Let me cut through your yard to the street. Jake looked down at Max. What do you think, buddy? Should we help him? Max let out a short, dismissive bark. Sorry, Jake shrugged. Dog says no. Agents swarmed around the corner of the house. Don't move. On the ground. Now, Daniel Donovan, the master of the universe, the man who treated people like furniture, was tackled into his own prize-winning rose bushes. His face was pressed into the dirt. Plastic cuffs were cinched around his wrists. As they hauled him up, dragging him toward the waiting cars, he screamed threats. He screamed about his lawyers. He screamed that he was a victim, but nobody was listening. The cameras were rolling. The news helicopters were circling overhead. And the footage of Daniel Donovan being dragged away in handcuffs, dirt on his face, defeated by his own hubris, was beaming live to millions of screens around the world. The fall was swift and brutal, with the mercenaries confessing and the insurance fraud documents public. Daniel's empire crumbled overnight. His board of directors met at 9 a.m. and voted unanimously to oust him. His assets were frozen by the DOJ. The friends who had drank his scotch and laughed at his jokes gave interviews, calling him a monster and claiming they barely knew him. But the real story wasn't about Daniel. It was about Maria. The photo of her walking out of the fire station. Holden Lunahu was sporting a bright paint cast signed by the entire fire crew became the Emmy of the Year. A GoFundMe page set up by Sophia to help pay for legal fees, and Luna's vet bills had a goal of $5,000. Within 48 hours, it hit 200,000. People didn't just send money. They sent letters. Thousands of them. Stories from other housekeepers, other nannies, other invisible workers who had been mistreated. They thanked Maria for standing up. They thanked Jake for stepping in. The legal proceedings were a formality. Daniel stripped of his high-powered legal team because his assets were frozen, took a plea deal to avoid a 20-year sentence. He pleaded guilty to animal cruelty, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, but the most satisfying moment didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened at the auction of Daniel's estate to pay off his debts and the settlements to his victims. The mansion and everything in it was sold. Maria didn't go. She didn't want to step foot on that property ever again, but Jake went. He stood in the back of the crowd as they auctioned off the furniture, the art, the cars, and then they came to the rug, the white silk rug with the scotch stain still faintly visible. The auctioneer started the bidding. Nobody wanted it. It was damaged goods. Jake raised his hand. $50. The room chuckled. The auctioneer sighed. Sold to the gentleman in the back. Jake rolled up the rug. He didn't take it home to put on his floor. He took it to the animal shelter down the street, the one where Luna had been adopted from. He donated it to the puppy play area. Let the dogs pee on it, Jake told the shelter director with a grin. It's what he would have hated the most. 6 months later, the air was crisp, smelling of autumn leaves and woods. Maria walked down the sidewalk of a quiet neighborhood. She walked with her head up. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a warm coat and a scarf Sophie had knitted for her. She stopped in front of a small storefront. The sign above the door was fresh, hand-painted in bright colors, Luna's grooming and pet care. Inside, the shop was bright and happy. Dogs were everywhere. Sophia was behind the counter, working on a laptop, finishing her homework between customers, and running across the floor. With only a slight, barely noticeable limp was Luna. The dog was a blur of energy. She greeted every customer with a wagging tail. She was the mascot, the survivor, the heart of the business. Maria unlocked the door and flipped the sign to open. She had used the settlement money and the donations not to buy a mansion, but to buy freedom. She was her own boss now. No one told her when to take a break. No one looked through her. The bell above the door jingled. Maria smiled, expecting a customer. It was Jake and Max. Morning, boss, Jake said, leaning against the counter. Max trotted over to Luna, and the two dogs touched noses, a ritual greeting between best friends. Jake Marai beamed. She came around the counter and gave him a hug. It wasn't the desperate cling of a victim anymore. It was the warm embrace of a friend. You are early. Your appointment isn't until 10. Max couldn't wait, Jake said. He heard you were making those homemade dog treats again. Maria laughed. It was a rich, full sound. For Max, always free. Jake looked around the shop. You did good, Maria. This place, it's amazing. It is peaceful, Maria said, looking at her daughter and the dogs. That is all I wanted. You got more than peace, Jake said. You've got justice. We got justice, she corrected. Jake watched Maria work for a moment. He saw the way she handled the animals with respect, with kindness. He saw the way. The community came in not treating her as help, but as a neighbor, a business owner, a hero. He thought about the night he broke down the door. He thought about the risk. He thought about Chief Holloway warning him about his career. He still had his job. In fact, he had been promoted to lieutenant. The city couldn't fire the most popular firefighter in the state, but the promotion didn't matter. What mattered was this: the quiet victory of a normal life restored. You know, Jake said, scratching Max behind the ears. People still ask me about it. They ask me why I did it. Why I risked my pension for a dog and a neighbor I barely knew. Maria stopped sweeping. She looked at him. What do you tell them? Jake looked at Luna, who was currently wrestling with a squeaky toy, blissfully unaware that she had taken down a billionaire. I tell them, Jake said, that the world is only as good as what we walk past. If you walk past the cruelty, you become part of it. If you stop, well, sometimes you win. Maria smiled. She reached into the jar on the counter and tossed a treat to Max. He caught it in midair with a satisfying snap. Two stopping, Maria said. Two stopping, Jake agreed. Outside, the sun was shining. The shadows of the high hedges and the gated mansions were still there, miles away. But here, in this little Shop, in this corner of the world, the light was warm, and everyone two-legged and four-legged alike stood on solid ground. Jake clipped Max's leash on. See you next week, Maria. See you, Jake. He walked out onto the street. He took a deep breath of the cool air. He looked down at his dog. Come on, partner, Jake said. Let's go home. They walked down the street together, a man and his dog, just two ordinary parts of a world that was a little bit safer, a little bit kinder, because they had refused to look away.